Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 193rd edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 648th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, November 5th, 2020. I'm your host, Andy Bottoms. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
Well, for this week's banner moment, I'm going to talk about the election, not the entirety of the election, but more some of the images that came out on of IU players voting that we saw this week in college basketball, really giving all teams, having them have that day off so they could vote. So it started out with India Franklin tweeting out a picture of her and Armond after he had voted for the first time. The IU account tweeted out a picture of Armond as well, along with Anthony Leal, Nathan Childress, and Joey Brunk, all having voted. And perhaps the one that Coach will like the most is Mike Roberts tweeted out a picture where he was sixth in line, got to his polling location at 5:35 a.m. So you got to get up pretty early in the morning to beat Coach Roberts at voting. But I think while there are a ton of things that we'll look back on from this year, not fondly at all, I think one thing that this week has really proven as the voter turnout numbers come out, and just as how involved people have gotten, both young people like in the IU basketball program, but people of all ages really getting more involved and using their vote, not letting that chance to have their voice heard slide by. And it's been a good opportunity even for me to sit down with my kids as we were filling out our ballots and say, hey, this is, researching candidates. Here's what, here's things that you might look for and things like that. So I think the just overall interest in voting and the democratic process is really good. I like that IU highlighted these guys getting out and doing that. And it was great to see them being involved. And hopefully as you get this generation of first time voters now, they always remember this, and it doesn't become a situation where, years lapse and they're first time voting when they're 30 years old or whatever, that this becomes just a part of their process, a part of who they are. And I think it was exciting to see that. Glad to see that IU spotlighted that for them as well. So kudos to all those guys. And now we can kind of continue to turn our view a bit to the basketball season. So with that, let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left,
he remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
it's the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Coach, what's on your mind this week?
Well, I'm probably going to stick to basketball just because I'm really excited about basketball getting started, and we know that there's all kinds of different scheduling things. But a couple highlights for me, it seems like so far there hasn't been any bumps in Indiana's scheduling from its a couple of bye game situations that you're hearing about, including the one on November 25th to the ACC Big Ten Challenge. I think so far it looks like Indiana has a chance, and I know it's day by day, but that excites me that the games are relatively close to playing. You get to see some pictures, and I know I'm not a big guy on workout pictures and that, but you see him in the gym. That's quite exciting, and not to rain on the shot doctor himself, but there's an interesting picture of three guys shooting, and they all have some unique positions of their hands and where the ball is in their shot. And as long as it goes in, you don't mess with it. But if it doesn't go in, you got to break it down. But they all look like they have some unique positioning of their hands on the shot. And then I've taken a couple weeks off from Coach's Corner in the community, but I will let everyone know that I'm studying the pick and roll varieties to see what Indiana might add to their offense, and look for in the next week or two some breakdown of things that look for early on in the season from Indiana's offense. So for me, it's basketball. I'm excited. I start practice myself on Monday, and looking forward to it.
All right. That sounds great. And to my right,
analyzing players, fingers, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me
answers.
quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your rant on the last weekend? The run sheet here specifically says IU Sports. Perhaps that's trying to protect you from yourself. I'll leave it to you to how you want to handle that.
I feel like so I am going to talk about the election. It's not a political statement. I think that this feels like when you eat like way too much cake and then you don't want to look at cake for like 6 years. In our case, probably 4 years. That's how I feel right now. I just feel like it's been I'm just tired of it and I don't want to look at it anymore. I just want it to be over. Because it's been really hard to focus on sports. That's my day job is sports. And over the last 3 days, nobody cares about sports over the last 3 days. We've been writing some great content and it's just nobody's looking at it, you know? I would just say that I think that this is completely captured our world over the last few days. And I think everybody in America is glued to it. I mean, for the most part, what I will say is I just want to say to all our listeners that I love you guys. You guys are awesome. I've been following along on Twitter with a lot of the people that are regulars and stuff. And you guys are so great. And regardless of who you voted for, where your feelings are, whatever, I just want to let you guys know that we love you and this will pass and we'll get to talk about basketball in a real serious way pretty soon. And we're going to do that tonight. But, despite everything going on in the world, I'm constantly awed by the people who listen to this show and contribute to it. And, we love you guys. And it's a great escape to come on here every week, no matter what's going on in the world and get to talk about sports with three of my friends and tonight, two of them, but three of my friends and, who have become like family and get to engage with you guys who have become like an extended family. So that's my election rant is just, I'm so ready to be doing this again. And it really is making me happy that I get to do this tonight.
Definitely a welcome break from things. So this week, we are going to talk about a handful of Hoosier headlines. We'll talk about what we can learn from the preseason computer rankings. KenPom, in what can only be described as a savage maneuver, unveiled his preseason rankings right in the heart of election coverage at night.
Great timing, Ken.
Yeah, just fantastic.
It was like baseball handing out their Gold Glove awards right as some states were closing the polls. Like,
yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, So anyway, that was a good move from him. So we've got those, even a little preseason bracketology from Coach and the folks over at Delphi Bracketology. So we'll talk about that this week on Assembly Call. But before we get to all of that, I want to tell you about a new sponsor who is joining us here on the Assembly Call. It's Superior Insulation, aka Superior Insulators. And this sponsor relationship started like so many of our others have, because the owner of the business, Brad, is a loyal listener to the show and a longtime IU fan and season ticket holder. So with winter right around the corner, the timing is perfect to tell you about Superior Insulators and why you should consider giving them a call. What do Superior Insulators do? I do know how to say insulators, just to be clear, but this is, and we'll get to this later, Insulators. It's Insealators. So just wanted everybody to know that I am not an idiot who can't read. That's actually the name of the business, Insulators. So what do? They provide high-performance insulation and air barrier systems to the residential, commercial, and agricultural sectors. In other words, they help you live and work more comfortably by fixing drafty rooms, cold floors, and excess noise in your home or office. And they help you save money on your energy bills in the process. Yes, more comfort and more cost savings. That's a TJD level double-double right there. And just in case you're wondering about their track record, let me sum it up with one word: excellence. That's right, the Superior Insulators did all the air barrier systems and spray foam for the new IU Excellence Academy. Brad and his team also worked on the new IU football locker room, Marching 100 Hall, and many other buildings on campus, so they're kind of a big deal. And best of all for you, they have a special offer for Assembly Call listeners. You will get a $50 home field apparel gift card when you call and schedule an appointment in a qualifying area. They have 4 locations covering roughly the southern 2/3 of Indiana, plus the northern part of Kentucky. Just tell them the Assembly Call sent you to get your gift card. So visit insulators.com to learn more and schedule your appointment. Then Brad and his team can help you create a healthier, quieter, and more energy-efficient home. That's insulators.com. Again, that's INSEALATORS.com to learn more, and tell them the Assembly Call sent you to get your $50 home field apparel gift card. All right, guys. So Hoosier headlines for this week. Last week we were talking the impending Trey Kaufman commitment. He did end up committing to Purdue. I think we were starting to hear about the time we did the show a week ago some rumblings, and it appeared to be that things were pointed in that direction. So I think by the time the announcement came out, not really a huge surprise. But Ryan, any quick reaction to Trey going to Purdue, what that might mean for the dominoes of what that means for IU up next?
Yeah, we got word that was probably going to happen over the last week. I know we all kind of texted about it a little bit the week leading up to the commitment. And look, it's a bummer to lose a top player from the state of Indiana. But when you look at some of the factors in his recruitment, especially if you're looking at the postmortem of it, which some people have written about, it looks like that was kind of the way he was leaning for a long time. He just kept things close to the vest. He had a lot of friends at IU. He had a lot of friends, he played with Logan Duncombe, who's in IU's recruiting class. So I think people connected dots to him being there, but he also kind of wanted to be the man. And I think as long as Christian Lander is in Bloomington, he's going to lead the charge, especially moving forward into the future. And so I think that there was some pushback there. Trey made the decision he made, and good luck to him. It's certainly not going to be fun to play against him for Indiana, but Indiana's also got other options out there. And I said it last week, and I made kind of a speech about it that Jared tweeted about, was that one recruit is never going to make or break Indiana, regardless of how much you want them. One recruit is never going to make or break Indiana. Kaufman's a guy, rated in the 30s, top 30s. That's a very good recruit. He's not Trace Jackson Davis. He's not Christian Lander. He is not a game-changing, program-changing, Cody Zeller type recruit. He's a very good player, and it's not going to, and it would have made life a little easier for Indiana. But again, other options are out there, and Indiana is pursuing those very, very aggressively. And I think that, I would say one bad recruit or even one bad recruiting class. And I'm not saying this is going to be a bad recruiting class. I think this has a chance to be a really good recruiting class. But one bad recruiting class is not going to break Indiana. And so people were really upset about it, really loud on Twitter about it. But it's one player, and one player doesn't change a program, especially when there are other guys out there you can get to sort of fill in or replace them.
Coach, does that just mean all chips in on Mason Miller at this point, or what are your kind of thoughts on where IU turns next from here?
Yeah, I think Mason Miller seems to fit. And what we've heard, it's down to Creighton and Indiana, and that would be where I would go to fill that spot at 6'9", shooter, athletic. I think that would look good in what Archie Miller wants to do, and the Aminu recruiting thing. Who knows exactly where that at? Some people think it's good for IU. Some people think it's started to get lukewarm, but that would be another addition. And the bottom line is ultimately you want guys who want to wear the cream and crimson. And if it comes down to you are ended up second, you wish the young man well, and then you go try to fill the spot. But that's what you have to do. And I start getting concerned with these guys when they commit to IU, and then I want to study them and learn, because once you make a commitment, then you kind of want to be there. And that's when these guys really become important. And just so much information out there before they commit that we all know. And, not much attention is going to be paid here on DJ Carton at Marquette and the Garcia kid at Marquette, and unless they really blow up. But those were a couple misses too. And sometimes when you miss, you're disappointed, and it doesn't turn out to be bad. And sometimes the guy becomes an All-American, and you wish you had him. But recruiting's a tough business, and just if you lose someone doesn't mean that you're not doing your job as a coach. You're doing your job. You're not doing your job as a coach if you're not even in the ball game. So tough decision, but it's time to go forward. And the team that's on the floor is the 11 guys that are practicing right now.
Yep, and the other two announcements, I guess you could say, this week. So IU did announce their opening game on opening night of the season on November 25th will come against Tennessee Tech from the Ohio Valley. In any of the preseason polls, publications, anything I've seen, they're picked toward the bottom, somewhere around 9th, 10th, 11th in the OVC. KenPom has them at 312th. Torvik somewhere in the 230s as of at least a couple days ago, and then CBS and their kind of non-analytics based rankings that have come out over the last few days had them at 320th. So feels like the definition of a bye game, even though that bye games are going to look a little bit different this year, there. And then today, Trace Jackson Davis was on the Karl Malone preseason watch list for the top forward in the country. So was one of 20 players on that list. I think good to see him get those early accolades. I will not ask either of you for a preliminary scouting report on Tennessee Tech by any stretch of the imagination, but Ryan, just kind of feels like a good in a season where you're not going to have too many gimmies. It feels like a gimme, and in that regard, a good way to start off the season. And nobody's going to complain about a sub 300 team at this point, because you know that 25 of the 27 games are going to be against high major competition at this point. So, is that pretty much all you read into the opponent?
It'll be nice to get a layup in there. I think, especially because, as we've said, it's going to be a bloodbath in the Big Ten, as it always is, and you want to rack up a win, but you also want to get guys comfortable playing with each other, and you want to get your rotations down, and you want to get all of these things. Just get guys comfortable being on the floor. You got to get that out of the way, and so sometimes you do need a cupcake here and there. So I think it's good, and at least there's going to be a basketball game. You know what I mean? And you're not going to have to wait until conference season to sort of do that.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Coach.
I just think you need to get a couple games where you can go and get stuff on film and study film. And usually when you have 11 non-conference games, you're somewhere in 5 or 6 of these kind of games where you should win, and you schedule a variety of teams. And this year it's going to be really tough. Like you said, 25 teams, 1 or 2 games where you should have it a little bit easier is going to be needed.
Yeah, I would imagine as they work this out, the only other game, there's probably one other game they can schedule that we don't know about right now. It'll be another opponent similar to this, in my view, and then your other 5 non-conference games will get filled up with the Maui/Asheville Invitational, the Crossroads game against Butler, and then the Big Ten ACC game against Florida State, plus your 20 Big Ten games. So that's what it looks like. Just kind of a question of what the dates are for some of those and who you get to fill that other bye game spot. But at least it's starting to come into view, and I have not seen anything about when the Big Ten plans to announce their schedule, but I think some other leagues have started to do that. So I think the SEC is tomorrow on Friday, so perhaps it will be soon. Certainly a lot of moving pieces as we go through that, but that will do it for the headlines this week. And so when we come back, we've got the official release of KenPom's preseason projections and a couple sets of computer rankings to digest. We discuss what, if anything, you learn about IU and the Big Ten. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
Hi, this is AJ Moye. What's the only thing better than upsetting Duke in the Sweet 16? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach for the Assembly Call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers!
All right, thanks, AJ, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com, and if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcast or watch those replays and see all the between-segment banter, then check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Ryan Phillips and the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and as I mentioned in the opening, KenPom decided to drop his preseason rankings right in the midst of election night coverage, so led to some humorous college basketball tweets for sure. But the Big Ten is well represented toward the top of the rankings. Just to go through a few of these, you've got Wisconsin at 7, Ohio State at number 10, which is a little bit odd, Iowa at 12, Michigan State 15, Michigan 17, Illinois 18, Purdue 25, IU 26, and Rutgers 27. So that's 9 of the top 27 teams in the preseason rankings for the Big Ten. He even had Minnesota 35th there as well. So really solid numbers there. You've got then the CBS Matt Norlander's 1 to 357 rankings was a similar story. IU came in at 25 there, right after Ohio State and Rutgers. And you also had kind of the consensus top 4 of Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, all in the top 13. So, again, you look at those 9 of the top 27 in KenPom, 7 of the top 25 on CBS, and 10 in the top 40. Torvik is a pretty similar story at this point, where I think there's 6, 7, 8 teams in the top 35 or so. So, Coach, as you look at those numbers, it certainly makes the scheduling stuff we talked about with playing that many games against Big Ten competition and how good the league is. What are your main takeaways from, what, if anything, we can glean from these preseason numbers?
Well, I think Indiana's at a place where they probably should be in the mid-20s. Andy Katz had them at 17, but when you break it down, I think that's where Indiana should be, and it's really an improvement in the 4 years. There's no excuse. We all wanted this change of coaching staff and program build to go faster, and maybe it should have gone faster with wins on the court and some of those things. But this basketball program under Archie Miller has gotten better on KenPom for the last 3 years, offensively and defensively, while the Big Ten was getting more competitive. And as you just mentioned, you just listed all those teams in the top 30. If you're getting better in the conference was 5th in KenPom in Archie's first year, and it was ended up being first last year. And again, everyone's talking about how great the Big Ten's going to be this year, so it's really, really tough. And I think the improvements need to be in Big Ten play, where it's been a little tough sledding for Indiana in a statistical way. But for me, I think KenPom has, I would maybe argue that they probably need to be ahead of Purdue. I think teams like Purdue and Ohio State, for some reason, get a little boost because of some past numbers. And KenPom uses past numbers to get the season started, and it takes a month or so before they're really reflective of the year. But that would probably be my only situation with where Indiana is on a KenPom. But they're really close all the way. And please remember, and Andy, you know this too, that I didn't know this until I started doing bracketology. If you're 24, 25, you're a 6 or 7 team. So if you're a top 25 team, you get a 6 or 7 seed. We usually think that's not a good seed, but you could be a top ranked team and get a 6 or 7 seed. So we got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, Ryan. So as you look at these, what stands out to you? You look at, you're ready to say something. So what stands out to you when you review these rankings?
What stands out to me is that the Big Ten is going to be really good. There are 10 teams in the top 35. I mean, that's crazy. 9 in the top 27, and Indiana is 8th in the Big Ten and 26th out of the top 25. I mean, that just tells you that is a crazy deep conference, and it's not. It doesn't look like there's an elite team. There's not a number 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. It's 7 through 26. That is. And there's a lot of teams in there. So it's really good teams, but typically teams on the edge of the top 10 are going to lose games during a season to teams that fall in that 20 to 30 range. They're vulnerable. So that tells me there's not a huge gap either between these teams. I mean, there's a lot packed in there, but there's no team that is ranked number 1, and there's no team that is expected to have only 1 or 2 losses. That's a lot of teams right in that pack that is competitive. And when you're in that range with those teams, you're competitive. Indiana, on the bottom of that range I'm discussing, can beat the teams above it. They're not that far off if these rankings wind up being reflective of what the season looks like. I also think that, the numbers for Indiana look pretty good as far as offense, defense. And you see the improvement there that is expected offensively and defensively from, again, we're getting, these are all projections, but Indiana's defense, 17th, offense up to 40th. Those are the kinds of things you want to continue to see from Archie Miller's program. They've improved pretty much every year in those metrics. And if they continue to improve, Indiana is going to continue to climb in its ability to compete in the Big Ten. You'd like to have that jump be a little faster, a little higher, a little more impressive, but they continue to get better gradually. And really, that's what you want every year, is for each year to be better than the one before it. Again, you'd love them to take a jump, but when you see improvement in a program, it's impressive.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at league rankings. The Big 12 has 5 teams in the top 10, which I think Texas in a lot of cases is there because they've got so much returning. They added a really good recruit. But I don't know how feasible that is, but I think the Big Ten, Ryan, you hit on this a little bit. While they may not have a ton of teams that are right at the top, maybe top 8 type teams, there's this cluster of 4 teams toward the top of the league that we've talked about for a while. Every ranking set seems to have Iowa, Illinois, Michigan State, Wisconsin in some order as your top 4. And then you don't have a huge drop off, and you've got another cluster of teams. It's kind of the IU, Rutgers, Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan type group there, and these are the teams that are clustered pretty well in these computer rankings. So I do think a small improvements one way or another can really dictate that. So I think that's kind of what it tells me about the Big Ten is you've got a really closely packed competitive league that may not have the top end teams that some other leagues have, but is going to be incredibly competitive in a truly odd season. The other thing, Ryan, that you mentioned was kind of where it projects IU on offense and defense. And so the offense last year finished 65th. They're projected to be 40th this year. The defense finished 26th and is projected at 17th. So, Coach, what are your thoughts on which one of those jumps is most likely to come to fruition, and why do you push your chips toward the offense or the defensive side?
The quick answer would say defense because the system's been in play for 3 years, but you are losing a guy in Justin Smith who was predominantly a defensive player. So is that going to jump from 26th to 17th? And then the margin there is you're a good defensive team if you're 26th. 17th is borderline getting to be real solid. There's not a whole lot of area to improve where there's a lot more area to improve offensively, especially with shooting. And yet we can see the impact of an athletic Race Thompson finding his role and Christian Lander and freeing up some other guys to do some things. So I think they're better defensively, and that's it takes just the heart and the mind to play defense. It takes some skill and some developed skill to play offense. But I'm going to probably lean a little bit more towards offense because I think they're going to take a bigger jump than they have in the previous years where they've gone from 92 to 82 to 65. This would be a 25-point jump if they do hit the 40 projection. But I'm going to say that I think with more guard-oriented, ball screen-oriented, using the athletes, I think they might jump a little bit higher offensively than they do defensively this year. And maybe that's just me hoping.
I think they're going to run more too, which will make you more efficient offensively. I mean, if you're getting easy baskets in transition, that will show up. And part of the problem with Indiana in the last few years is there was a lot of half-court offense. And a lot of half-court offense, when you don't have shooters and you're passing the ball around the perimeter a lot, winds up not being very efficient. And so obviously that ticked up with Trace Jackson-Davis on the inside last year. And that ticked up once Al Durham started driving, getting the free throw line more. And that ticked up when you started to see some progression from these other guys around the basket. But if they're running and not turning the ball over, I think that is going to be where they take that next step. I think that's going to be the biggest source. And then, of course, shooting. I mean, do they shoot better? If you shoot better, your efficiency goes way up because you're getting 3 points instead of 2 for one shot. And I know that's simple math for most people. I'm a journalism major. Nothing is simple math for me, but I know that one. If you're taking a shot and it's worth 3 versus 2 and you make it, it's a lot more efficient, and that ticks up efficiency. And when you look at offensive efficiency rankings in the NBA and college basketball, a lot of the teams that shoot well from beyond get a huge boost and are often in that top sector.
Yeah, I think the offensive piece probably has a lot to do with personnel. I mean, you look at the numbers from last year. Devontae had the highest usage rate on the team at 27% of possessions, and he was 98 offensive rating, which is anything below 100 you don't feel great about. And so you take away a guy who was not particularly efficient, who was using a lot of possessions. The belief has to be that those get redistributed to people who are more efficient in that. Now it remains to be seen whether that's true. You can't just pick up all of those and give them to Trace, who was ultra efficient last year. But I think a lot of the offensive improvement is baked into that part of things as well. To me, I think that even though a 25 spot jump feels pretty big there, that for some reason still feels the most doable to me of the two, even though I think you could see defensive improvement, but I don't know that you're going to see substantial defensive improvement again, unless it's just being in the system more and getting a little bit. But I think they
have better athletes too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're deeper rotation players will be better athletes, which tends to help your defense.
Yeah. So
and probably,
I don't know.
and let's face it, Joey Brunk might not be starting, and I think a lot of their efficiency defects there were him guarding out on the perimeter. I think that was pretty easy. A couple other guys too, but he really struggled out on the perimeter, and it was a spot that opposing offenses attacked consistently. We saw it. How many games do we come on here and talk about that?
Well, and
the
I
thing
think
that gives us hope. Go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
The thing that gives me hope too is like last year with Devontae and Justin, they were streaky. When they were good offensively, we played well. But when they didn't, they had really bad games, and so did the Indiana offense, and that had to affect the overall numbers. The hope has to be you got sophomore TJD. He's improved. You got some athletes that hopefully there is some margin where they've improved from last year and can play a little more consistently. And the depth allows that too, that if someone's struggling, you can go a different way. I don't know if you're going to see as many inconsistent players. If you do, we're going to struggle offensively. It's not going to be a good year, but hopefully there can be some less streaky type offensive players, which would lead to better KenPom numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Justin was the other. Devontae is the obvious personnel change. Justin wasn't necessarily inefficient. He was a 105 offensive rating on a reasonable 18% of possession. So reasonably efficient player, but I think, again, if the belief is you're replacing him with somebody who's going to allow you to space the floor a little bit better, open up driving lanes, do some different things. When you were playing him before, he just, people would play off of him, stand in the middle of the lane when he was on the perimeter and basically dare him to take shots. So I think there's some inherent efficiency to be gained on the offensive end with him being gone as well, in addition to the streakiness coach that you had mentioned. So, to me, I'll say the offense can take a leap. That obviously remains to be seen, but I guess good to see that projected at least as a possibility. So. Other thing I wanted to get to was a little bit of early bracketology. I've started to look at things, but I'm not as deep into it yet as the folks at Delphi Bracketology are. So, Coach, I saw on Twitter that you guys had some of your initial meetings and released the top 4 seeds in each of your regions. So the Big Ten teams included. For anybody wondering, you guys had Illinois as a 1 seed, Iowa as a 2 seed, Wisconsin as a 3 seed, Michigan State as a 4 seed. So. What was some of the discussion like for those teams as you look at what the season may bring for those consensus top 4 in the league?
The interesting thing is we're a committee, so we had 7 people on a Zoom meeting Monday and talking and voting in the chat, and it did come down to votes sometimes. I think Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin probably might be a little high actually for my liking, but I don't think they're too far off. You see a lot of love for Illinois and Iowa. I kind of pushed the group to not use Iowa as a number 1 seed because I don't think they can guard, and I don't like Fran McCaffrey. So anything that I run's not going to have them a number 1 seed. That's totally bad bias on a part of a bracketologist, but it's preseason, and that's not what counts. So, there was a discussion between Iowa and Illinois for the best team in the Big Ten, and both teams are returning a lot of players. That's where that comes from, and you could add Wisconsin into that mix too. The Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin seeds reflect returning players. Illinois, to me, is the most consistent with its returners. Iowa has returning players that don't guard. Wisconsin has, just good team chemistry, but I think you can beat a Wisconsin if you play well and have really good athletes who are on their game. So I think they're most vulnerable to not repeat what they did last year. And then Michigan State got it probably just because of the respect of Izzo and the fact that they always find a way to win. So I think they might be 1 seed line higher. Except for Michigan State. Maybe Wisconsin should be a 4 and Iowa 3 and Illinois a 2. I think that's probably going to, when they start beating up on each other, that's more likely to happen than what we have preseason.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, in starting to look at it myself, I was a little bit surprised to see Illinois on the 1 line, but I think you could get a 2 seed and a couple 3s out of the league in total. How that shakes out, who that is tough to say. But again, if the league is as tough and as good as everybody expects it to be, nobody's probably going to run away with the league, which ultimately hurts your chances to get a top seed. But I think you're going to also have a chance to pick up a ton of quality wins, and it'll be a little bit like last year where virtually every night out you've got a chance to get a quality win in there. So the next part of this is just kind of looking at the next tiers and whatever else you might think of. It feels like IU, Ohio State, Rutgers, based on most projections, whether they be computer-based or otherwise, seem likely teams to be in the field if people were projecting that early. And then you've kind of got Michigan. They did get the Wake Forest transfer eligible, so that helps them a decent amount. Maybe that vaults them into the likely in the field category. And then Purdue, maybe Minnesota, even Norlander was a little bit higher on Maryland than most people think. Do you have any kind of feel for, or have you guys started to talk through other teams and a general feel for the league and how many teams they might get? So if I put the over under at, I'm going to say 8.5, so that you aren't compelled to push. Where would you fall on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because our main discussion is how are we going to decide this year. In a normal year, you have this net ranking that the NCAA uses. They also look at things like KenPom and Torvik to help break ties or move teams up and down. And most years we've done all right. The last full year we had a tough year in using that formula to pick. So we kind of had a rhythm of picking teams. If we had that and full non-conference, 31 non-conference games, it is our belief that the Big Ten would probably go over that 8.5 at 9-10. I think it's going to be more eye test, and I think the record and the conference records, unfortunately, are going to play, and that's going to hurt a Big Ten because last year you had 5th through 11th was a 2-game difference, and 5th place record in the Big Ten was 11-9, and then IU was 11th at 9-11. That's a play at Maryland, switching that around, and IU moves up. If there's a good year and you have 7 close games and you win 5 out of 2, you're going to move up that very easily. The way the ball bounces, the Purdue's and the IU's who were 10th and 11th could move up. It was that bunched. And if that happens this year, isn't IU going to make it at 9-11 in the Big Ten, who would have made it under the net and the other things because of the quad system and the big wins in the non-conference? So we think it's going to be and then teams missing games is another thing. You have 21-day COVID rules. So we're talking more about slotting the best conference a certain number. So we think that it's going to be 8 for the Big Ten this year. And a couple teams are going to be really good that are going to be left out because they're going to see other conferences that have a 14-4 record in the American Conference, and that's going to sway, I think, people to be a little more balanced. That's at least our initial lean. So I'm going to go under. I think really they deserve 10, to be honest with you, as tough as it's going to be in traditional ways.
So, guys, I have a question. Since you're the two bracketologists, obviously, two of the best in the world, what happens typically when there are a lot of top teams in the conference? Do they wind up producing 2, 3, 4 seeds, or do they wind up getting benefit for being in a tough conference and jumping to the 1 line? Like if Illinois loses 4 times, 5 times, but played an insane schedule, could you see them getting a 1 seed? 4 times, I'm talking in conference, like 4 times, maybe 5 times. I know this year's weird because there's no non-conference to pick up losses either. But, or do you think that that's going to drag them down, but they'll get a better 2 seed than they would a bottom 1 seed?
I don't know that it'll drag them down a ton. I think the challenge will be that eventually the losses do matter. I know that's something that sounds cliche to say, but you're going to have a Gonzaga who's going to run through the WCC, and they always schedule pretty well out of conference, and they will again this year. But they're going to put up a pretty gaudy record and going to look, by all accounts, to be a really good team. So you feel like they're going to be there. I think Villanova could potentially do something similar. The Big East is solid in the middle, but there's not outside of Villanova and Creighton, there's not a lot there. They could end up with a gaudy record. Does one of the Big 12 teams really assert itself? And then who knows what happens in the ACC, whether it's Virginia or Duke or somebody like that. So I don't know. I think if they went 16-4, 15-5 in the Big Ten, I think they would be right in the heart of the conversation for it. and this year and one without fans, a lot of times the travel and the proximity to where, some of the potting and where you get placed matters a lot. I don't know if that's going to matter this year, because a lot of times it's, this is a short distance, they're going to bring tons of fans. Well, if that doesn't happen, it really does become about matchups in that regard, as opposed to saying, hey, well, I'm the 2 seed, but I'm closer to home than getting shipped out west as the 1 seed, or whatever that might look like. So that may not matter as much, but I don't think they'll be totally penalized. But again, I think you don't see a ton of 1 seeds that rack up a large loss total. But this year is going to be different in basically every way that you can think of. So it doesn't mean that they couldn't, but I do think if to your specific example, they only lost 4 or 5 league games and played well outside the league, I have no idea what they've got planned there, then I certainly think that they could get a 1 seed.
Yeah, I think the loss of non-conference games, if it happens due to quarantine or just the scheduling, will hurt the Big Ten more than losses in conference, because you could lose 4 or 5 games in conference, but if you racked up some big wins and you still have the ACC Big Ten Challenge and you still have some other things, and this is where one thing that I think benefits IU is you're playing 25 solid teams. I think you can absorb some losses because your strength of schedule. I have a feeling that strength of schedule is going to be looked upon, especially if you get 5 to 7 non-conference games. But also that each team is independent and they look at the big wins. And the thing that hurts the Big Ten more is what you don't get done in the non-conference as far as big wins. Indiana made the tournament last year because they beat Florida State and they had some good wins. They had to win in the Crossroads. Those are important to teams in a tough league, and if those are lost, that could hurt in a real tough competitive, where Duke can play 7 games, 8 games against teams that don't really compete and really build up that gaudy record that Andy was talking about.
Well, and I think, we'll wrap this up here in a second, but I think the one thing that among the things I've learned from doing bracketology is it's really hard to underestimate the importance of a league's performance in the non-conference and what that does to everything. If they perform well, it is truly the rising tide that lifts all boats. It makes every win in the league look better because your league has asserted itself. So that's why, even from a selection committee perspective, you need to be able to evaluate what a league has done against others, and you need some of those non-conference games. That will be certainly difficult this year, but I think that's the thing to really look for. If the Big Ten can come out in whatever events it plays in, the Big Ten ACC Challenge, all those things, if the Big Ten asserts itself well, it really sets up nicely that everything that happens from there, you kind of got everything rolling downhill. If you don't, it doesn't mean you can't overcome that, but it like I said, it's really, I can't underscore enough how important that really becomes for the league. So,
Andy, you're talking like Michigan had a great start last year, won that their MTE. Ohio State was 10-1 and ranked high, and so when you beat those in conference, that elevates everyone. And so now you beat teams like that in the conference, and you get those quad 1 wins, and that might be what's missing this year, and it's going to be hard for you and I to really, and other bracketologists, to really figure out, because that helped us compare teams from conference to conference.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, coming up on our final segment, we will answer your questions. We got a number of good ones to hit, and we'll try to go through as many of those as we can. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
All right, thank you, Jordan. And did not pick the Jordan Halls intro on purpose, but congrats to he and his wife on a new baby girl that arrived this week, I believe.
Congrats.
All right. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and Ryan Phillips. And remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason. And after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. Now, time for our mailbag. All questions are submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can find out more about at assemblycall.com/community. Jared did put a question on Twitter this week, which he put in here, I presume, because he was part of the winning ticket, of which ticket you'd be most likely to vote for in the next election and why. It was some, but not all, combinations of the four of us. The Tonsoni Morris ticket won with nearly 30% of the vote, but things were relatively evenly split from there. So I think
we need to do a runoff with the top three vote getters because they were all very close. And Bottoms Phillips, I think, has an outside shot to win it. We got 24.6% of the vote.
We did, not bad. Bottoms Tonsoni was 26.5 as well. So who knows?
Here's the message here. Everybody loves Brian. Like, it's just he had the top two, and I was kind of mad. I
just say the stuff they all want to say that they don't say normally.
Well, and I was mad that they didn't pair me with Brian because I knew that would lift any vote I got.
You were hoping to ride his coattails to victory.
Yes, thank you. Exactly.
Reasonable. All right.
No, Phillips Tonsoni. That's
all right. Let's get into the questions. We don't have a ton of time. All right. Matt submitted this one: upperclassmen versus underclassmen in a scrimmage. Who are you taking? So, for the purposes of this, I had to make Jerome Hunter an upperclassman, which I suppose he is based on his redshirt status. So the upperclassman team would be Al, Joey, Rob, Race, and Jerome, and the underclassmen team would have a sub, so maybe that helps in this. Would have TJD, Armond, Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway, Christian Lander, and Jordan Geronimo. So, Ryan, I'll throw this one to you first. You said you love the question, thought it would be competitive. Who are you taking?
I would take the young guys because you got Trace Jackson Davis, arguably Indiana's best player. I don't think it's arguable. I think he's Indiana's best player. You've got Armond Franklin, who's a bulldog defensively. You've got Christian Lander, who might be the second most talented player on the team and eventually the most talented player on the team. And then you got the guys who can run. You got Jordan Geronimo. You've got Galloway to be a bulldog. And you've got Leal who can shoot it. I'm taking the young guys. I think it would be so much fun to actually watch this in person.
Coach, what about you?
I'll take the old guys, the experienced, that they know the up and unders to get the young guys out of position that have played. Give me L. Durham, our captain. I think he's going to, take over in this scrimmage. And yes, I do see where the talent probably lies with you, Ryan, and the young guys. But just the veteran presence and knowing how to step on toes to get a rebound and pinch and grab that Joey Brunk does. Give me the old fellas.
I'll take the upperclassmen too. I think TJD is a big reason to take the young guys, but I think you got Joey and Race to hopefully work on him a little bit. So I'll take the upperclassmen. I won't get into it any more than that, so we can get to a few more questions. Kathy asks, has there been any word on when the schedule will be released? No is the answer to that, as far as I've heard from a Big Ten perspective, or from IU. Any truth to the rumor we may have conference-only games? Real quick, either of you think that's realistic? I've heard it floated before, but everything seems to be pushing toward that not being the case. But do you think we end up in a conference-only situation, Ryan?
I think they're going to do some non-conference games. I don't know. I don't have anything to go on, but I feel like they're going to try some of them. I don't know if all of them will stick, but I feel they're going to try some of them.
Coach, what about you?
Yeah, I think you'll get some. I do think teams will have a variety of numbers. Some will get a full 27. That's allowed. Some might get 22, 24, which, again, is going to make our job as bracketologists difficult. But it all depends on where you're traveling and what you're doing. We're seeing changes in whatever schedule we've kind of heard. We're seeing changes happen almost every day. So we're going to have to take what we get.
Let's see. I'm going to go to Barry's question. Best Big Ten basketball uniforms, not Indiana. This says past and present. We only got about a minute, so we don't need to get into both. I'll take this one first. The old Michigan State with like the script state across the front, I think is a good one from my perspective. So I'll say that one as a past one at least. Coach, any other thoughts on this from you?
I like the old script kind. It's, again, why we like home field apparel, the old logos, that. So, I was going to say those Michigan State uniforms too, but Illinois had some nice script things. And what I really like are the short pants. That's how I played, and that's how, real men played in short pants. And so give me those. Those are the best uniforms of all time.
I have a feeling that's a drop that's going to be coming up.
Oh, yeah.
Very shortly.
Yeah, Ryan, 15 seconds. Any thoughts for you?
Really quick, I loved the Fab 05 era Michigan uniforms and I'm going to contradict Coach, with the saggy pants, loose fitting. I love that as a kid. I got to stick with that.
All right. Perfect. Ryan, I was going to interrupt you with your own drop, but I will not do that, although that would be somewhat fitting.
Don't do
All right. That will do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you hear on the show, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night. Until then,
take it from me, AJ Moye. Keep your elbows and eyes on the rim and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll turn this back on. We'll hit a couple more questions here real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's see. This one, any chance we see Archie go small? The lineup thrown out here was TJD, Jerome, Al, Christian Lander, and Rob Finney. So you think we see a lot of Jerome at the 4? I think everything Archie said, you're going to see some flavor of this. How much you will, I don't know, but what he alluded to in the comments that he's made would suggest this is definitely in the realm of possibility. You guys agree with that?
Oops. Yeah. I think Jerome's going to play some. I even think Race is going to be could play in a small way a little bit more, even though he's a traditional post. I think you're going to see him off the bounce a little bit on a pick and pop or pick and short roll, and I think he's going to start stretching the floor a little bit. So, I think small ball certain times is going to be good.
A lot has been said about incoming players, but among returning players, whose growth will impact this team the most? Ryan, you got a thought on this?
I think Christian Lander.
Of returning players.
Returning.
Oh, returning. I thought incoming. I'm sorry.
No. The lead up was a lot has been said about incoming players, but among returning players, whose growth will impact the team?
Returning, I think Jerome Hunter. I think his development is going to be enormous for this team because it gives them an option for scoring off the wing. And that's one of those things where, you got Al Durham off the wing a bit. So he's more of a more traditional guard. But I think that Hunter's size, his length, his ability to shoot the ball, and his ability to do multiple things on the floor. We saw him post up last year a couple of times to isolate him in post ups against smaller players who are going to have to guard him on the wing. And then, again, go back to his shooting ability. His ability, if he can develop. And remember, this was a guy who, when they got him in the same recruiting class as Romeo Langford. And the thought at the time was, Langford's going to start this year and go to the NBA, and then Hunter will take over that role the year after. The year after was last year, and we remember what happened the year before where he was out for the entire year with an injury. So he's just a year behind in his development, but the thought originally was Langford will be your wing scorer, and then Hunter will take over. And Hunter was, as a freshman, was going to play as a reserve, but then take that spot. Hasn't happened yet, but that ability, his ability still exists. And we saw last year at times, he's incredibly talented. You watch if you're ever bored, go watch his high school footage on YouTube. The kid can play. And if he's back to normal, if he's developed and advanced, because he's been healthy for a while now, other than his tonsils, of course, then he's going to be a really good player. And I think that his development is huge for this team because it gives them another reliable scoring option other than Trace Jackson Davis.
Coach, what about you?
I can't argue that. Rob's development and just from
always important
staying healthy and adapting to the new pick and roll thing is important. But I'm going to go back to Race Thompson too. I just think he has a chance, and it's a big if, and we have to see it consistently on game nights. But he has a lot to bring as a 4, and we said, can he stretch the floor and shoot? Can he do some of those things? So, I think those 3, Rob, Race, and Jerome, returning players, if they can elevate closer, a little bit more steps towards their potential, will really benefit Indiana. I guess I didn't answer the question. We went through the whole roster, but I think this whole roster has a lot of room to improve that some people who are predicting aren't kind of seen, and we see a little bit closer. We might tend to over-evaluate them a little bit from our fandom, but these guys have some skill, and it just needs to be consistent.
Yeah, not to further what you said by mentioning everybody on the roster, but I was going to mention Armond Franklin either way. I think you can see a really good leap from him. He started to show some things toward the end of last year. You would expect a big jump from freshman to sophomore, so I think that one's interesting. And to go back to what you said, listening to Archie on the AJ Guyton podcast, he just talked about how together the team was and how important that was going to be to everybody. So I do agree that there's probably some things that are going on, just as he sees this team come together, that it's hard for people making predictions to get a read on. All right, one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll from Bob Thompson, actually. Inspired by AJ Guyton's new pod, what former player or players would you most want to hear on a pod? What would you want them to discuss? This is a little bit difficult because the Hysterics have interviewed a ton of old IU players, so it's hard to go. It's hard to go through the Rolodex of who that would be without without hitting somebody that they have. But anybody come to mind that you guys would want to hear?
I can't think of anybody who we haven't heard from. Do you guys have? I mean, you're
Ryan. Would you want to hear Marco Killingsworth give a oral history of the dunk? I don't think
that'd be fun. But I'd like to hear Marshall Strickland. I liked him a lot when I was in school. I got to interview Marshall a few times, and he was an interesting dude because he was really smart. And this is just obvious. I'm looking at my own fandom and the people I haven't heard interviewed. Marshall was an incredibly intelligent guy who was, I think he was pre-med or pre-law, and I think he's a dentist now, if I'm not getting that incorrect.
I'm pretty sure you're right about the dentist.
Yeah,
I don't remember the other stuff, but yeah.
Incredibly smart guy and really cerebral. And his career at IU was a bit derailed by playing with Bracy Wright the first 3 years. He was kind of pushed to the side and forced to play point guard when he was really a shooting guard. And then his senior year, they brought in Earl Calloway and Monroe. I don't remember his name. And they moved Marshall to shooting guard, and he played so much better because he's finally comfortable. That was a guy who sacrificed for the better of the team by letting Bracy Wright essentially play shooting guard while he was playing point guard, and sat by while all of that was going on, never complained, and was sort of a square peg in a round hole. And then he finally played shooting guard and had a great senior year and was a leader and all those things. I really liked Marshall a lot. I would be interested to hear just about his life, how he's doing now, all that stuff, how he made the transition from basketball to dentistry. That would be interesting for me. And that's just, again, from my 20 years as an IU fan, that's one guy I haven't really heard about. Well, the Hysterics have, cleaned out the locker of all the other guys.
Coach, what about you?
Even though they have, I will throw this a curveball answer is, what kind of topics do you want to listen to? The Hysterics do a good job of bringing back how did you get started through high school and in college and the recruiting and what was your favorite memory. That's awesome stuff, and we really enjoy that. For me, as a high school coach, I want to talk to some of the players who maybe weren't the best on their particular teams but had a role as a point guard or a leadership, and really talk basketball and pick their minds about what does it take in practice? What's the locker room atmosphere like? How did you watch film? And maybe, that's not for a lot of fans, but for some of us, that technical detail, how do you fix a shot? And for me, there's a lot of former players that were coaches. Keith Smart has gone on to coach. Randy Whitman has gone on to coach. Jordan Halls runs camps. I'd really love to talk to Jordan Halls about his work ethic and his summer workouts. Dane Fife, I would love to spend like 10 hours just talking to Dane Fife about his toughness. And then my favorite is Quinn Buckner. But those guys have all had some sort of leadership and toughness and leading and doing specific skills that help teams. And so maybe the format of the podcast would be a little bit different because a lot of these guys have already been talked to in different ways.
Yeah, that's a good one. Jay Edwards is one that I would throw out that I'd just be curious to hear, talk about his experience and, leaving early and the things that he, what it would have been like for him to be able to play with Chaney and some of those guys. So that's one I don't believe they've talked to, at least as best I could tell. Even Jared Odell, if you want to go back to somebody from the, from the Final Four team in the early 2000s that hasn't been on. But all right, gents, I think that will do it. We got a couple others that we can always hold over until next week when hopefully we have maybe a little bit more schedule news. I mean, the season's supposed to start soon. There's only so much longer that you can go before you announce the schedule if you're the Big Ten. So that feels imminent at some point. So whenever that happens, we'll talk through that as well. But cool. Well, thanks for hanging out.
Good night, everybody.
And everybody, thanks for joining us, taking a break from everything else going on and talking a little basketball. So
thanks for letting us do this, guys. We really appreciate it.
absolutely.
Without
All
you
right.
guys, we can't do this, and I really needed this tonight.
See you, chat mob. Yep.
All right.
We'll see you.
All right. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.
Later, guys.